Hope you enjoy part 12. Tracy and Hermione sat in the room of requirement alone, working through a large pile of books that the room had provided them. After 2 days, with very little to show for it, the two girls were beginning to become aggravated. "This is hopeless," Hermione cried as she flung a book across the room. She immediately felt bad for abusing the tome, but her own frustrations was affecting her judgment. She was becoming more and more agitated each day. "I think you're right. There's just nothing conclusive on death or love. Just a lot of theories and shite." Tracy groaned, shutting a thick book with a heavy slam. Hermione turned to give Tracy a disapproving look. Tracy merely shrugged. "Loosen up, Granger. Sometimes a curse word is the only one that fits." Tracy smiled. "It doesn't help our cause. How can we even ask Harry to attempt this if we can't back it up with fact? I'm asking him to risk his life because I believe there's a chance he'll be okay. Maybe belief is all we need," Tracy said as she stretched her back, feeling the muscles loosen a bit. "You've got to relax a bit. Let off some steam." "I don't know how," Hermione said, feeling ashamed. "I've always been wound a little tighter than most. The only thing that relaxes me is reading. And right now that's the last thing I want to do." "You're telling me that when you and Ron were together you didn't feel relaxed after a good snog?" Tracy prodded. Hermione felt her face flush. And she tried to change the topic, but Tracy wouldn't allow it to happen. "Come on, Hermione, it's just us girls here. Tell me truthfully, did you or did you not feel really good after a nice long snog?" Tracy pushed. "Okay. Fine, yes," Hermione hissed irritably. "When we first started dating, yes, it was very enjoyable. But then it became almost like a duty. That's when it stopped." "Have you two talked since the breakup?" Tracy queried. "Yeah. We both felt that it was silly for us to get together. It was safe and all that. But that's also why it didn't work out. We just don't fit together as lovers. But I'd never give up the friendship we have. Is there anyone other than Harry you fancy?" "How do you know that?" Hermione looked shocked. "Did Daphne say something to you?" "No." Tracy chuckled. "You just confirmed something I believed for a long time. There's nothing wrong with it. I'd bet that if it hadn't been for Daphne, you two would be together. But since that can't happen, is there anyone else? Anyone who makes you shiver when they walk past, or who at least strikes you as snoggable?" "Are you always this crass?" Hermione asked, feeling her cheeks redden a bit. "Usually." Tracy shrugged. "I don't know. There are a few good-looking guys, but I just don't know them. Looks aren't everything, you know." "I agree." Tracy smiled. "A bloke needs to know how to treat a lady. He needs to know how to touch me, not just my chest, but my mind as well. Most guys just want to touch your chest, or get into your knickers." Hermione huffed, feeling a bit anxious about her small bust. "True. But there are the precious few who are worth the time it takes to train them up. For instance, Ron. Sure, he's got anger issues, but it's because of his home. He's got 6 older brothers, and I know from my own experiences that older brothers love to pick on their younger siblings. So, Ron's got a lot of self-doubt because of it. You simply have to watch his performance of the Quidditch pitch to see that." "Okay, I'm following you." Hermione nodded for Tracy to continue. "I knew when you guys were done before anyone. It was in how he looked at you. When you two got together, he looked at you so fondly. He smiled so tenderly whenever you were together, but it faded." Hermione looked a little sad at Tracy's observation. Tracy reached out and took her hand comfortingly. But there's someone else who's looked at you like a lovesick puppy for about 3 years now. I'm really surprised you never noticed it. Hermione's eyes opened wide in disbelief. What are you talking about? Tracy took her hand away and opened a new book. Hermione stared at her for a long moment, while she began scanning pages. Tracy, this isn't funny. Hermione shouted, slamming her hands on the table. Who is it? I don't think I should tell you. I mean, it might embarrass him, and he seems like a very sweet bloke. Tracy, I'm asking one last time, and then I'm going to hex you into next week. Hermione said, reaching for her wand. Boy. If I had a Canute for every time I heard that. Tracy. What is going on in here? Daphne asked as she entered the room. There you are. Finally decide to come help us. Tracy smiled mischievously. We've been at it for 2 hours now. Sorry if I wanted to drag out my breakfast with my boyfriend. Daphne looked affronted. Did the boys go flying again? Tracy asked. Giggling at Hermione's growing agitation. No, their homework's piling up a bit and they thought it might be good to ease their burden a bit. Are you going to tell me why Hermione looks ready to kill you? Daphne asked, motioning to Hermione whose face was red, and who was beginning to hex Tracy. Whoa! Tracy said. Noticing that Hermione had her wand out, and holding her hands up in surrender. Okay, I was just having you on. I was just telling Hermione about that boy who's always watching her. You know the one, who looks so sad when she walks out of the Great Hall with Harry and Ron. Longbottom? Daphne asked, trying to remember if there was anyone else. Tracy pointed out. Daphne had learned years ago that Tracy was amazingly observant, and she had an uncanny ability to read people. Daphne often wondered if Tracy were empathic. Neville? Hermione asked, looking gobsmacked. He's had a thing for you since the end of second year. Tracy nodded. It's gotten worse for him. He looked really sad the whole time you and Ron were together. Does he even have any friends? Hermione thought about Neville for several moments, trying to recall if he hung out with anyone exclusively. He has friends. But I don't think he's close to anyone. Hermione said, feeling a bit sad for the round-faced boy. He really likes me. I don't know if he really likes you, I've never actually asked him. I just see how he looks at you. I'd give both arms to have a boy look at me like that. Tracy smiled serenely. Maybe if you stopped jumping on them all. Daphne said softly. I heard that. Tracy pointed an accusing finger at her blonde friend. Watch him, see if you don't see how he looks at you at mealtimes, or in class. You're the standard by which he measures other girls against. Okay, now you're taking the mickey out of me. Hermione said, getting annoyed. Am I? Hermione, you've been kind of blind to a lot of things. There are more than a few boys who'd like to get into your knickers. Despite what you might think, you are really cute, and the boys have noticed. The trouble is you've got two very protective blokes around you all the time, and it intimidates other boys. Hermione looked completely stunned to hear all of this. She felt ashamed for not noticing Neville, and being a better friend to him over the years. She also felt a bit embarrassed hearing Tracy compliment her. So what should I do? Hermione asked softly, her voice just above a whisper. Take your time. And figure out what you want. Daphne answered. There's a lot of boys out there, and while a good majority of them will never measure up to Harry, some might even surpass him. And they could be right in front of you. That's sound advice. Tracy grinned, reaching out to give Hermione's hand a squeeze. Which brings us to a question. Since we're on the topic of boys, I was curious how you'd feel if I made a play for Ron. Hermione nearly choked, and Daphne had to pat her on the back a few times. You fancy Ron? Hermione gasped, wiping at tears. I don't know why, I don't usually fancy gingers, but something about him is me. Well, I don't wish to be crass, again. But you get the picture. Hermione felt like she was going mental. In the past few moments she had learned that Neville Longbottom potentially harbored a secret love for her, and that Tracy Davis fancied one of her best friends. An ex-boyfriend. I don't know what to say to this. Hermione looked between her two girlfriends. If you feel funny about it, I'll back off. You're my friend and I wouldn't want to do anything to foul it up. That's why I'm asking you before I do anything. Tracy said, her face showing her sincerity. Can I think about it? Of course. I'm sorry to bring it up like that, but I just wanted you to know that I think I might like a chance with him. Hermione nodded, waving off any further explanations. I was right. Dumbledore wheezed triumphantly as Snape finished his tale on all that had happened at Malfoy Manor. How do we get it? Professor McGonagall asked, ignoring Dumbledore's tirade. The goblins are not just going to allow us to enter that vault and take whatever we please. No, they most certainly will not. Snape said, sipping his tea, still trying to calm his frazzled nerves. He'd only just returned from witnessing the violent death of Peter Pettigrew. No, they will not just allow it, that is why I have procured help for us. I am confident we will have the cup in our possession by tomorrow evening. Dumbledore said with an air of conceit. Help? What kind of help? McGonagall asked incredulously. That isn't important right now. What is important is that once we have destroyed it, we will have to lure Lord Voldemort into the open. We must not waste any time. Dumbledore gave them both a strong look of determination. What do you propose? McGonagall asked. Feeling she already knew the answer. I think we may just have the perfect situation. We allow Voldemort to learn that Harry is to be visiting the Ministry of Magic, though we leave out the reason for his visit. You just don't give up, do you? McGonagall hissed. You're still hoping that you can somehow accomplish your goal of sacrificing that poor boy? If you mean I still believe that Harry must be killed by Lord Voldemort for this all to be truly finished, then yes. However, I am also aware that only Harry will be able to lure the Dark Lord out of hiding. Severus will never have a chance to kill him any other way. If we do it this way, we can have several people in place ready to end this war. As much as I hate to admit this, it seems there is very little choice. Snape said grimly. Yes, we do. McGonagall shouted, standing from her seat and glaring at the two men. That boy has been through quite enough. I am not going to stand by and let the two of you conspire to get him killed. Minerva. Snape held up his hands, trying to calm the Scottish woman down. I am not going to put Harry in harm's way. I'm simply agreeing that we must make the Dark Lord believe Harry is out in the open. Luring him to a place of our choosing will give us the greatest advantage. It will not be easy. The Dark Lord will be very suspicious, and is unlikely to come alone. And that is where we must be most adamant about. We must do everything to keep the odds in our favor. Dumbledore wheezed, clutching at his chest. Albus? McGonagall asked tentatively. I am fine. Dumbledore waved her off. McGonagall eyed him for a moment, but didn't push the matter. Dumbledore's health was deteriorating quickly now. And he wished to see the war end before he passed on to the next world. It would be advantageous if we could make him believe that Harry must be faced alone. Voldemort's own fear of being made a fool, or showing any weakness in front of his followers, will help us to that end. You want to use the prophecy? Snape looked surprised. A slightly reworded prophecy, yes. Severus, you will report to him that I have died, and upon my death, you have learned the full prophecy. Then we will arrange for Harry to go to the ministry. It is important that he be seen by Voldemort for our ruse to work. No. McGonagall said vehemently. Pick somewhere else. There is too much risk that others will be harmed. As for young Harry, we'll use polyjuice on someone, so the boy will never be at risk. We can get Kingsley, or someone who will be able to defend themselves. Snape concurred. There is no need for Harry to actually be present. But the ministry is not a bad location. We can make the Dark Lord believe he is being escorted there to gain new protection. The Dark Lord is quite aware of how he's been protected by you, Albus. With your death, most of those protections will fade. With the public believing him to be this chosen one, the ministry will at least want to appear to be involved in protecting the boy. Very sound reasoning. McGonagall nodded. Very well. Dumbledore sighed. Now, if you would both excuse me, I am very tired. I think a good rest is in order. Both Snape and McGonagall nodded and bid the headmaster goodbye. They walked out of the infirmary in silence, which wasn't broken until they were outside, with the door shut behind them. He gave up that fight too easily. Snape said. I felt that as well. Do you believe he will betray us? McGonagall asked. I think it would be very wise to destroy this last Horcrux and get Potter through the veil and out of this country as soon as possible. Snape glowered. Dumbledore will do what he believes is necessary in order to finish things his way. I believe you are right. I will speak with Harry and his friends this evening, and we will begin making arrangements. McGonagall sighed. We must not allow Dumbledore to know anything more about it, or he will use it to his advantage. Dumbledore had very little time left to accomplish his goal. After Snape and McGonagall left him, he wrote a letter with instructions, and sent them with his beloved Phoenix. After the bird disappeared, Dumbledore then settled back into his bed. He knew he wouldn't have long to wait, and they were so close to finally ending all the fear and death the world had been enduring. He closed his eyes and concentrated on breathing, which was becoming more and more difficult with each passing day. Still, he refused to shuck off this mortal coil until he saw the end of Lord Voldemort. His plan was sound, all he had to do now was wait. Within the week, it would all be over, of that Dumbledore was sure. There was a brilliant flash, and Fawkes had returned with his reply. Dumbledore scanned the letter, and smiled. He had entrusted a task to the one person he knew would accomplish it without questioning his sanity, or his motives. Dumbledore lay back now and shut his eyes to rest. There was nothing more to do until the cup was delivered to him, and then, he would have to set his new plan in motion. With a great sigh, a single tear fell from his eyes. He knew that he was right, and he would leave this world, knowing he had saved the world, though the world would never forgive him for his actions. With a heavy heart, Albus Dumbledore knew what had to be done, and was more than willing to be labeled a monster for the good of the world. Daphne and Harry were walking hand in hand near the Black Lake. They had begun taking strolls after dinner each evening. Most nights they ended up in the room of requirement, where they would inevitably end up sipping hot chocolate while discussing various topics, most bordering on the macabre, or occasionally snogging each other until neither could see straight. You've been rather quiet, Daphne said as she gave her boyfriend's hand a gentle squeeze. Do you want to talk about what's on your mind, or are we going to keep pretending that nothing's wrong? You know what's wrong. I've been trying to put on a brave front, but Harry couldn't meet Daphne's eyes as he spoke. Harry, Daphne said firmly, tucking a finger under his chin, and raising his head so he was staring into her warm brown eyes. It's okay. We're all scared right now. You have more right than the rest of us to be. I don't want be. I want so much to believe that this will all work out, and you and I will get a fairytale ending. Harry gave a half smirk as he said this, which made Daphne chuckle. She reached up on her tiptoes, and gave him a quick peck on his lips. Can we just pretend there's not all this stuff looming over us for the rest of the night? She asked, giving him a look that made his heart pound in his chest. He smiled and nodded, taking her in his arms and holding her tightly for a few moments. What would you like to do? He asked her. I want to spend a nice evening with you, and talk about the future. I want to know how you plan on supporting your future wife, and where we're going to live. I want to envision our life with you tonight. She smiled softly, caressing his cheek softly. I think I'd like to leave England, he said as he took her hand and they began walking again. Leave? Why? Daphne looked confused. I'd like to go someplace where I'm not ogled whenever I go out in public. Where people aren't trying to get pictures or autographs or anything like that. I'd like a quiet life. Harry said wistfully. That actually doesn't sound terrible. Was there any place in particular? Daphne asked, trying to picture it all in her mind. Italy. France. America. Someplace near the coast, I think. With a house on a bluff so we could watch the sunset on the ocean. French countryside. We could grow grapes. Maybe start a little winery and sell it to muggles. My father loves French wine. So long as it's quiet, and far away from all this. Harry motioned out with his hands. Just you and me. Our friends could visit, right? Daphne looked up at Harry, who smiled brightly. Of course. We'd have dinners at least once a month so we could keep in touch with everyone. I just want to be out of the spotlight, not disappear altogether. It all sounds really nice. But what would we do for money? Daphne asked. I don't know what all my parents left me, but I'm sure we'd figure something out. You once told me you'd like to open an apothecary. I'm sure we could do that. What about you? What would you do? Daphne stopped walking, halting him in the process. You told me you wanted to be an orator. Not anymore. Harry shook his head slowly. I've had enough dark wizards for one life. I've not really thought about it too much. I guess I should, but I just can't. Maybe it's a mental block. Like my brain is telling me to wait and see what happens before I start thinking too far ahead. Daphne nodded her understanding, and they began walking again. Well, whatever you choose. I hope it will allow for plenty of time with your family. I'm not raising our children alone, Mr. Potter. Harry didn't miss the playful smirk on his girlfriend's face. Children. He cocked an eyebrow. At least two. But I'm not opposed to more. She said matter-of-factly. How many more? Harry asked a little worriedly. Upwards of 4. Any more than that and you're just going to have problems. Daphne said smugly. 4. Harry asked with a bit of humor. Oh yes. The first one we'll conceive during our month-long honeymoon in the tropics. I've always wanted to go to the Caribbean, and my aunt tells me there is the most wonderful beaches. We can get a bungalow on our own private beach, and run naked through the surf. Harry gulped hard as he pictured Daphne running sans clothing on a warm beach at sunset. He tugged at his collar, which seemed to be constricting a bit. Daphne hadn't missed any of Harry's growing discomfort, and decided to push a little more. I expect you'll be very good at making sure every inch of my skin is properly protected against sunburn. You'll have to rub lotion on me at least every half hour or so. She smirked. Uh-huh. Harry managed to squeak. Can you just picture us alone on some private beach? Waking up each morning, our naked bodies still pressed together from the previous night's lovemaking. All right? Enough. I'm only male, and I'm going to have difficulty standing up straight if you don't stop. Harry moaned. Daphne gave a small laugh and took his face in her hands to kiss him soundly. You are absolutely adorable when you're all flustered like that. My dear one. She grinned. And you're vile for torturing a bloke like that. You shouldn't do that to me. Harry tried to grin, but could only grimace. His body had reacted typically at her descriptions, and he was finding it difficult to stand properly. Harry, my love. I'm just trying to tell you what awaits you in your future. She smiled. Now, I think it's time you take me someplace quiet, warm, and comfortable. And show me how much you want those things to become real. Daphne shrieked in mirth as Harry hafted her in his arms and practically sprinted towards the castle. She couldn't help it. She'd been watching him carefully ever since lunchtime. She hadn't wanted to. She wanted desperately to believe that Tracy was having her on. Making fun of her or something. Perhaps playing some sort of sick prank. But it had been true. Hermione had seen it with her own eyes now. At first she thought she was mistaken, as he'd turned his head away when he'd caught her looking back at him. He looked up at her again during lunch. She'd been a bit subtle at dinner, and with Tracy's help, she'd seen Neville watching her 3 times. And now, as she struggled to concentrate on her homework, she noticed him sitting across the room and occasionally glancing in her direction. She had been thinking about everything Tracy had said to her earlier. And she wondered when exactly Neville had begun to fancy her, or when he had begun looking at her the way he was at that very moment. She began thinking about Neville seriously. He was turning into quite a handsome-looking man. He'd be more attractive if he could be a little more confident in himself, she reasoned. He was very intelligent, she knew that for fact. Were it not for the constant berating by Snape, Neville would be one of the top in potions, because he understood much about herbology. Which was essential in truly understanding potions. And most of all, he was a very good friend. Even risking his own life to help Harry in the Department of Mysteries last year. That thought made Hermione sick. She realized that she'd barely spoken to him at all this year. He was just as alone as he'd always seemed to be. Hermione knew Neville had friends, she'd seen him hanging out with a few Hufflepuffs, or sometimes tagging along with Dean and Seamus. But he didn't have anyone he was really close to. And according to Tracy, he liked her. Neville fancied Hermione. She still couldn't get her head around the idea that someone might actually truly feel something beyond friendship for her. What was more was that she began to wonder if she might feel something for Neville in return. She was frightened that she might be projecting her feelings for Harry onto Neville, but she quickly dismissed that idea. If that were the case, she and Ron might have lasted longer. She would have done the same thing to her ginger-haired friend, and their relationship would have been quite a bit different. No. She was examining the idea of her and Neville with an open mind and open heart. Neville was strong, stronger than most people realized. He was kind, and very sweet. According to Ginny, Neville was an amazing dancer as well. Maybe there could be something there. Hermione looked up at him, just as he turned his own eyes back to his homework. She smiled softly to herself as she thought of Neville stealing glances at her, loving her from a distance. Maybe he was worth her time. Maybe she should just stand up and go to him, take him by the hand and ask him. Neville. Neville Longbottom looked up, and felt his face burn red. His throat seemed to close tightly as he stared into her almond eyes. He stuttered for a moment, and finally was able to get his mouth to cooperate with his brain. Do you have a moment? I'd like to talk to you about something. Hermione smiled shyly. Harry was trying to listen to Flitwick's lecture in Charms class. He was sitting next to Ron, who was actually trying to take notes. Hermione sat in front of them, busily scratching away at notes she would most likely share with her two friends later on. Probably after a long tirade about how they should pay more attention in class. Harry smiled to himself when he imagined it. She could be very predictable. But she could also surprise him. Take this morning for instance. He and Ron were coming down to meet her for breakfast, as they usually did during the week, and she was there as always, but she wasn't alone. Neville was with her, and they were holding hands. The two of them just stood together, not speaking, each with a strange blissful sort of smile. It was actually kind of sweet to witness. Neither Harry or Ron could believe what they were seeing, however. Harry wanted to ask about it, but he kept his mouth shut for the time being. He knew Hermione well enough to know she would explain it all in her own time. Ron had also remained mum on the topic, though Harry guessed it was because he was so caught off guard, his mind couldn't process it. Thankfully, Ron had been working hard at not just blurting things out. It was one of the really good things that had happened during his and Hermione's relationship. During breakfast, Neville and Hermione had shared looks. It wasn't helped when Tracy and Daphne joined them, and seemed to be in on the situation. Harry tried to ask Daphne about it, but she had deflected the questions, and skipped off to Transfiguration before he could press the matter. So Harry was left with a minor mystery. Yet, he could never remember Hermione looking so serene. Or Neville looking so proud. The normally bashful boy had walked about that morning standing a bit taller, his chest puffed out a little more as he escorted Hermione about the castle. Another strange thing that seemed to be happening was Tracy flirting so freely with Ron, who seemed a bit lost by it all. Tracy was very forward, and seemed to like touching him, especially on his leg or his shoulder. She always gave an evil little grin to everyone before doing something to freak Ron out. But the redhead never complained. Not a single utterance of displeasure. Harry stifled a laugh as he remembered his redhead friend nearly choking when Tracy had given his leg a playful squeeze. Harry doubted he would have acted any differently, as she had touched him rather higher on his leg than Harry guessed Ron had ever been touched. Harry was broken from his musings when the classroom door opened and Professor McGonagall poked her head inside. He could see she wasn't alone either. Behind her was Daphne and Tracy and someone he'd not seen in several months. "Professor Flitwick, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I need to see Weasley, Granger, and Potter right away." "Of course." Flitwick smiled as he waved to the three students to accompany the Transfiguration teacher. "Remember your homework for next time," he called after them. "Watcher, you three. Been a while, hasn't it?" Nymphadora Tonks smiled keenly as Hermione, Ron, and Harry joined the group. She was sporting her favorite bubblegum pink hair and looked happier than the last time he'd seen her. "Harry, you never once mentioned your girlfriend was so stunningly beautiful." "You were right, Bugger, you know that." "As you may recall, when we last saw each other, I didn't have a girlfriend." Harry tried. Tonks waved his remark away. "Details. Remus told me all about your situation. I gotta tell you, you could have done a lot worse." Tonks grinned. "What are you doing here?" Hermione asked, tiring of the playful banter, and a little upset about being pulled out of class. "Here is not the place." McGonagall intervened. Everyone became quite serious as they all realized what this was about. Professor McGonagall led the troop down the corridor and into the dungeons and an unoccupied class where Professor Snape was waiting. He stood before a large desk, looking like a stiff breeze might knock him over. There were dark rings under his eyes and his skin looked paler. Harry wondered if he'd been punished by Voldemort recently. "Nymphadora, you're the one who the old fool got to carry out his dirty work?" Snape asked, a little overwhelmed at the sight of the smiling young Auror. "Was no problem. Tonks shrugged. Dumbledore's note told me exactly what to do, and we were able to get it, and the goblins got themselves quite a bit of gold for their help. What are you guys talking about? Ron asked, more than a bit confused. This. Tonks smiled as she pulled a cloth-wrapped item from her bag, which they had only now noticed. She handed it quickly to Snape, who unwrapped it carefully and set it upon the desk before him. Harry began to feel fear in his belly as he stared at the cup. It's okay, it's just trying to save itself. You can beat this. Harry began repeating to himself. Daphne, noticing the look of apprehensive focus on her boyfriend's face, took his hand, hoping he might feel some sort of comfort from her touch. The goblet was pulsing with dark magic, and everyone felt tainted just looking at the atrocious object. Is that what I think it is? Tracy asked. She had only heard of the Horcruxes, and had up till now never seen one in person. Where was it? Hermione asked, knowing what it was immediately. In the Lestrange vault in Gringotts. Tonks answered. Dumbledore sent me a letter yesterday asking me to get it for you all. Told me exactly what to say and to who. I don't mind telling you I'm glad to be rid of it. Felt all nasty the whole time I had it. Can I ask why it's so important? It's going to help destroy Voldemort at last. Ron said, a small smile breaking out on his face. I don't follow. Tonks said, looking at all the others, and scratching her head. We haven't the time to fill you in, I'm afraid. Perhaps after we rid the world of this foul abomination. McGonagall was watching the goblet as if it might strike out at them any minute. Let's get on with it. Snape agreed, pulling the sword of Gryffindor from within his robes and looking to Harry, who was still staring intently at the cup. Potter, I think you need to be the one to end this. Harry tore his gaze from the cup to look at Snape, who was holding the sword out towards him. Harry could feel the cup's desperation mounting, and he knew he had to end it as quickly as possible. Is that? Tonks began. Sword of Gryffindor, yeah. Ron helped her. Harry didn't seem to hear them. He grasped the sword tightly and approached the cup. He didn't hesitate, or falter. Harry focused all his anger and resentment on that cup and all it represented. The loss of his parents, Sirius dying, years of torment at the hands of the Dursleys, Dumbledore's maneuvering, and the one responsible for it all, Lord Voldemort. Harry felt his very blood boil as he pictured the serpent-like countenance of his foe. Harry sucked in a lungful of air as he heft the blade above his head. Wait, that's a rare cup, it belonged to Hufflepuff. You can't. But Tonks' concerns were never heard as Harry cried out with fury, swinging the sword with all his might, splitting the cup in two with his strike. There was a loud metallic clang followed by the anguished scream of a tortured soul being released from its prison. The room was filled instantaneously by choking black smoke, and everyone was knocked to the ground by the concussive force of the escaping soul fragment. When they all got to their feet again, and the smoke cleared away at last, with help from the two professors and a bushy-haired Gryffindor, they all converged on the desk to see the cup cleanly split in two. Harry felt a strange sense of relief seeing the broken cup. At the same time, a weight settled on his stomach. He knew there was only one thing left to do, perhaps the last thing he would ever do. I think it's safe to say that it is gone. Snape sighed heavily as he found a chair to sit in. Okay, I think someone needs to tell me what's going on. Tonks demanded. What the hell just happened here? It was a Horcrux. A piece of Voldemort's soul trapped in an object anchoring him to this plane. Daphne filled in. So long as one of those things existed, he could never die. Did you just say his name? Harry looked amazed. Daphne tore her eyes away from the still smoldering cup and gave a shy smile. I guess I did. I love you. Harry grinned, taking Daphne into his arms and kissing her soundly. Wait a tick, are you saying you know who can't die because he's got these Horwhatsits? How many of them are there? That was hopefully the last one, Ron said, giving a look to Harry as he sat down in the closet's chair. Tracy sat next to him, giving a soft smile which caused him to blush slightly. How did you get it anyway? Harry looked at Tonks. Wasn't hard really. Dumbledore sent me a letter yesterday and told me I needed to get Madame Bones to secure the Lestrange vault. He told me what I needed to tell her, and that he needed that cup, and that anything else should go to the DMLE, but above all he needed that cup. Gave me a great description of it and everything. How'd you convince the goblins to allow you admittance? Snape queried. Don't know the specifics. Madame Bones handled the negotiation. I only suggested we give them the gold within, like Dumbledore suggested. I'm going to guess they got a little more as well. We went in, confiscated a bunch of contraband, and I was able to get my little hands on the cup and tuck it in my bag. That manipulative old bastard, Snape said to himself. I'm going to assume he promised them something extravagant. The goblins wouldn't have allowed the Ministry access so easily otherwise. So what happens now? Hermione asked, looking terrified, as she already knew the answer. Two things must happen now, McGonagall said firmly. And they must happen as fast as we can make them happen. The first is to get Harry to the Department of Mysteries. When it is finished, I think it prudent to get him as far away as we can manage. Second, we must plan a way to destroy the Dark Lord once and for all. How? Ron asked, looking at the three adults in turn. We haven't perfected it as of yet, but we are going to allow false information to leak to the Dark Lord. Something to make him believe he must face Potter without anyone else around. Someone will be disguised as Potter, and we will have people in hiding. When the Dark Lord appears, it will be finished. Snape told them. Who's going to be playing me? Harry wondered. It isn't your concern, Potter. Snape snapped. It is if someone dies. Harry countered angrily. Harry. Daphne said gently, taking his hand in hers. It's almost over now. Your fight is almost over. You don't have to worry about this anymore. Don't you understand? He shouted. Don't any of you understand? I don't want anyone else dying for me. Are you so conceited? Snape glowered. Do you truly think we're doing all this solely for you? What about everyone else? Do you really think they don't also wish to be free? Harry felt suddenly ashamed. He'd known it wasn't all about him, but he didn't like the thought of someone posing as him and getting killed. Why does Harry need to go to the Department of Mysteries? Tonks wondered aloud. Tonks, thank you for your assistance, but we can't tell you any more at the moment. For Harry's safety, McGonagall said as she shook the Auror's hand in gratitude. Right then. Tonks smiled suspiciously. Guess I'll be going then. You lot stay out of trouble. With a few hugs, and some goodbyes, Tonks left them. So when are we going to do this? Harry asked with a sigh. It would be best if we could coordinate the two events. Snape said simply. Give us some time to get our plans together, and then we will see this through. You did well, Harry. Harry nodded, accepting the rare praise from his most hated teacher. You should all return to classes. We must keep up appearances. McGonagall said by way of dismissal, and the 5 students made their way back up to the Great Hall where lunch was no underway. I shall call for a meeting tonight, and we can go over our plans with the rest of the order. McGonagall said after the door closed. Minerva, We need to keep all the details about Harry away from Dumbledore. Surely you don't think he would go against us, do you? He believes so vehemently that his way is the only way. There is no telling what he might do. We must protect the boy until it is all over. McGonagall nodded, understanding in her eyes. With a slight nod, the Transfiguration teacher left the classroom, leaving Snape to ponder their predicament. Thursday night found Hermione, Tracy, and Daphne sequestered in the room of requirement once again. They were sitting around the table, books piled all about them, but not a single tome was opened. They had spent nearly every moment in the room trying to find anything they could to back Hermione's theory about the veil, and time was running out. Plans had been made for Harry to go to the Department of Mysteries on Saturday evening. Finally Tracy broke the silence. Clearing her throat, she looked to Daphne. We've all agreed that love is going to anchor him, right? Both Daphne and Hermione nodded. Tracy paused a moment to collect her thoughts. Then maybe you need to show him how much you love him. Give him a reason to fight, or whatever he'll have to do. What do you mean? Hermione looked puzzled. You're going to be married anyway, so if you were to take that step early, it wouldn't matter really. Tracy tried to explain. Get married now. Daphne raised an eyebrow. Merlin, you can be thick. Tomorrow night, seduce him. Make him a man, rock his world, show him what love really means. Tracy smiled lightly. Daphne still looked confused. Do I need to spell it out? Tracy asked. Fine. Oh my God, you can't be serious. Hermione cut in, stopping Tracy from what she knew would be a very crude tirade. Yes. I am. I can't think of any other way to show their love for one another, while giving Harry a real solid anchor. He's a male, after all, and they really are simple creatures. Make love to him before he goes through the veil, and he'll have every reason to get through it. Daphne's face was a mask of horror and shock. She stared at her best friend as if Tracy had just said she was going to start showering with Hagrid. You can't be serious, she said after a few moments. Can you think of another way to show him you really love him? Tracy cocked her head. It does sense in a strange sort of way. A show of physical love does send a powerful message. And like she said, you're going to be married anyway. Hermione said after mulling it over. I don't know if we're ready for that. Daphne stammered. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Daphne, you're my best friend, and I would never push you into something you're not ready for, but you can't tell me you haven't thought about it. Of course I've thought about it. I'm 16 for crying out loud. I have a boyfriend, who I love, and who's very fetching. Yes, I've thought about what it would be like, but I just thought it would happen when we were ready, in the future. You mean after you were married? Tracy smiled lightly. Daphne nodded slowly, her face falling into sadness. You guys have come a long way in a very short period of time. You understand each other better than most couples. I've seen how you are together, and I could never have imagined you caring more for someone than you do for him. Are you willing to give it all up? Or are you going to fight to keep him? Do you really think it will work? Daphne asked, her face turning a bit pink as she envisioned trying to seduce Harry and making love to him for the first time. We've looked in every book we could find. Tracy motioned about the room to the stacks of books piled in various piles. We've talked until we were blue in the face, and the only thing we have all come up with is that it is going to be our love to anchor him to this world. But only you can show him how much you love him. Well, Hermione could, but that might be awkward. Tracy chuckled at her little joke. Both Hermione and Daphne glared daggers at the auburn-haired girl. The point is, this is more than just words. This is an act that shows him that you truly love him. You're giving yourself to him. If that ain't love, then I'm clueless on the subject. Have you ever? Hermione tried to ask, but Tracy shook her head. I know what people say about me, but I've never felt that strongly about a guy. I've done things that come close, but I've never gone all the way with anyone. Hermione looked at Daphne, who gave a slight shrug. Daphne knew Tracy was a little freer with her body, but she always shared the tales of her conquests, and never had Tracy spoken of making love to anyone. So the question is, do you think Harry Potter is worth it? Tracy gave a serious look to Daphne, who sighed, then after thinking about HW she felt for the green-eyed boy, and how he made her feel, began to nod her head slowly. Good. Now we have something to do tonight, other than read musty old books. What do you mean? Daphne looked up, suddenly frightened. We are going to prepare you for the night of your life. Tracy grinned. She looked at the two other girls, who wore identical masks of terror. Thanks for letting me fly with you guys. Neville aided, still breathing hard as he and Harry and Ron sat down on the pitch. Anytime. Ron said, patting Neville's shoulder. Why didn't you try out for Quidditch? You'd have made a bloody great chaser with as fast as you can fly. Neville shrugged. I don't know. Too embarrassed, I guess. Besides, there were a lot of good people already trying out, I didn't think I'd have much chance. If you flew even close to what you did up there today, I would have put you on the team without question. Harry smiled. We should get a few others and just have a game for grins. Ron said. Maybe a girls vs boys kind of thing. That could be fun. Neville nodded. So, Nev, Ron said, giving Harry a significant look. You and Hermione, what's going on there? Instantly, Neville's face burned bright red. I was wondering when you guys were going to get around to asking about that. We've been waiting for Hermione to tell us about it, but she's been really busy. Harry said sympathetically. Don't take this wrong, we're not angry, or anything like that. Ron said reassuringly. We were just taken by surprise, is all. So was I. Neville gave a small smile. I've liked her for ages. She's so smart, and she's always been real nice to me. She was the first person I met on the train. I thought we might become friends, but you three kind of bonded, and there didn't seem to be any room for any more people in your group. Our group? Harry asked, stunned. You guys were always real close to each other. Anyway, I don't know exactly what it was, or when it happened, by sometime in third year, I started seeing her different. She was becoming really beautiful, and I just started crushing on her. Every year, it got worse. I even tried to ask her to the Yule Ball, but she had already said yes to Crumb. So how did you finally pluck up the nerve and ask her out? Harry asked, very interested in Neville's story. She asked me actually. I was studying in the common room last Sunday, when she walked up to me and asked if she could talk to me. We went for a walk in the castle, and she told me that someone had told her that I liked her. I was pretty much cornered, so I admitted it. I expected her to let me down easy or something, but she didn't. She just hugged me. Hugged you? Ron looked perplexed. Yeah. Then she started crying. Neville gave them a shrug. I was so confused. I didn't know what to do. Crying girls do that to a guy. Harry shook his head, remembering his date with Cho Chang. I got her to calm down a bit and she just started talking really fast. She told me that the reason she and Ron didn't work was because you weren't right for each other, and that it was safe, and some other nonsense. It's true, Ron admitted, a bit sadly. We were too afraid to meet other people and try to find happiness. She was safe, and I knew she wouldn't hurt me. Then she went on to tell me that she really fancied Harry, but you were with Daphne, and she felt alone, and lost, and then she told me again how someone had told her I fancied her. She told me that I wasn't second place or something, but she had some things to work out, but she wanted to start to get to know me. Then she kissed me. Wow, Harry said, amazed by the story. We're going to take things real slow, and get to know each other. Like she said, there's no hurry, and I like my chances if we keep things simple right now. I know there's a lot going on with you guys, and I'm not going to ask about it. I just want to be there for her when she needs me. You're a good man, Nevada. Ron smiled, offering his hand. Neville grasped it firmly and they shook hands. Harry smiled and patted the round-faced boy's shoulder. I know you guys are tight, and I feel like I should tell you that I will never hurt her. Neville gave a slight smile, and the other two boys looked at each other, awkwardly. Nev, we're not worried about it. Harry smiled. Hermione would never have chosen you if she thought it was even a remote possibility. Yeah, I know, but I just felt I had to say it. Neville smiled. Harry noticed how he smiled easier since he and Hermione were well whatever they were. His whole demeanor had changed. He spoke up more, and seemed to becoming a bit more confident. Which was why Harry wasn't surprised by Neville's next question. So what's going on with you and Tracy Davis, Ron? Harry chuckled as Ron did a double take. At lunch the next day, Daphne sat next to Harry at the Gryffindor table. She had been rather anxious all morning, Harry had noticed, but he figured it was for the same reason he felt tense. Tomorrow evening would be the end of his war. Professors Snape and McGonagall had sat him down the previous night and gone over the plan with him so he understood what was going to happen. Harry was happy that his friends would be accompanying him, as well as Remus Lupin. It would be good to get one last moment with them in case things did not go according to plan. Still, Daphne was rather more fidgety than normal. She kept shooting worried looks to Tracy across the table. Harry had tried to ask her what was bothering her during Transfiguration, but she had hushed him, and refused to look at him the rest of class. When class ended, she apologized and ran off to herbology, while he, Ron and Hermione had gone off to charms. Harry was just about to ask again, when she tugged his arm and began guiding him out of the great hall. They walked in silence until they were outside in the warm spring weather. "Do you love me, Harry?" Daphne asked quite nervously. "Yeah. Of course I do," he said, puzzled by her question. "Do you really love me? I mean, really love me?" "Yes, what's this about?" "Okay. This is going to sound really strange, but Tracy, Hermione think we've come up with a way to help you tomorrow night. To give you something to hold onto," Daphne said, her face reddening as she stammered. "Great." Harry smiled. "Yeah, it is great, but I don't know if that is to say oh bloody hell." Daphne grimaced. "Look, just meet me in the room of requirement tonight at 9. Everything will be clear then, okay?" "Absolutely." Harry nodded, promising he would be there. "Okay, I've got to go. I love you, Harry," she said, kissing him passionately before running back into the castle, leaving a very confused Gryffindor in her wake. Harry couldn't stop thinking about her request. During their potions lesson, he tried to ask Hermione what was going on, but the bookworm feigned deafness. Daphne was not present at dinner, nor was Tracy or Hermione. Harry asked if either Ron or Neville knew what was going on, but clearly the other boys had been left out of the loop. So, Harry had to try and be patient. Whatever it was had Daphne very nervous. He'd never seen his girlfriend so unsure, or unable to stop fidgeting. He only hoped that whatever it was worked. Harry had been hiding his growing fear well, but now that his hour of reckoning was nearing, Harry was becoming overcome with fear. He'd hardly slept in the past week, and his attention continually waned, even with Daphne. He tried to comfort himself by thinking that he would finally see his parents again, and that once it was all over, those he was leaving behind would be safe and able to find happiness in their own lives. But at the same time, he knew he wasn't ready to leave this world. He and Daphne had talked a lot about their future together, and Harry wanted it to become real. He wanted to marry her, and raise a family with her. To find a home somewhere far away and live out the rest of his days in peace. He wanted to have the life he knew he'd earned. All that was left to do now was to wait, and hope that his girls hadn't failed. Miss Granger, thank you for coming to see me. You've got thing L in hand for tomorrow evening. I'm not supposed to talk about it, sir, Hermione said apologetically to the headmaster, who looked nonplussed over her answer. Indeed. I just wanted to know that things were going smoothly, and offer you any assistance you might need. Assistance? Now you want to help? You told me that my idea was never going to work, and now you want to help me? I can't believe you. Hermione said bitterly. You should have been trying to help Harry all along. You never should have put him with his foul relatives. You should have tried harder to free Sirius. You should have done more to keep him out of that tournament, and the things you allowed to happen while Umbridge was here is inexcusable. Miss Granger, I have apologized for it all. I can do no more. I only wish to know, before I leave this world, that the war is over. Dumbledore said calmly, while Hermione stood up swiftly, glaring hard at the old man. We're taking care of it. We don't need you anymore, Professor. With that, Hermione turned on her heel and stomped out of the infirmary, leaving the man she had admired for so long to die alone, hopefully soon. She couldn't believe the nerve of the man, who should have protected Harry better, instead of preparing him for slaughter. She needed to find Neville, he would help her calm down. She couldn't let her anger control her now. She needed to be calm, and focused. Harry was counting on her. She allowed herself a little smile as she thought of her best friend. He would be okay, she knew it. She could feel it in her very soul. Harry was going to be fine, and it was because of her, and Ron, and Tracy, and Remus, and most especially, the girl who Hermione regarded with fondness. She and Daphne had really become close over the past month. Hermione knew that Daphne's love for Harry was just as strong, if not stronger than her own. And that's why she knew that Harry was going to be okay. Albus Dumbledore waited until the door shut before allowing himself to smile. He had chosen correctly in Granger. Weasley would of course have known, but his mind was a jumble, and it would have been difficult to glean what he needed from that mind. But Hermione Granger was organized, and logical. He had also judged correctly in thinking that by angering her, she would be unaware of his intrusion into her mind. So focused was she on unloading her anger, that she was completely blind to his use of legilimency. He had what he needed now. He was going to see this war ended once and for all. All he had left to do was to pass on what he knew. He reached to his bedside table and took a bit of parchment and a quill and wrote down everything he had learned in detail. He could afford no misunderstandings now, not if his plan was to succeed. With a few final scratches of the quill, he reread his letter to make sure it was clear, and concise. Then he called out, "Thatcher." With a pop, a skinny house elf with bright blue eyes, and a rather bulbous nose appeared and bowed low. "How may I serve the head of Hogwarts?" the elf said in a surprising baritone voice. "Please take this letter to the Oli. It must be delivered this night, so choose the fastest owl we have," Dumbledore ordered. The elf bowed again, took the letter and with another pop disappeared. Dumbledore settled back into his pillows and closed his eyes. Tomorrow evening, it would all be over, and he could at last rest. Harry entered the room of requirement precisely at 9 p.m., just as he'd been asked to. It was dark, with a small fire being the only light. He closed the door behind him and called out for Daphne. In answer, the room lit up a bit more, and Harry lost his breath. There were candles everywhere, even on the floor, that had lit up as if on command. In the center was the biggest, softest-looking bed Harry had ever seen, and standing in front of it, was Daphne. Harry blinked several times to make sure he wasn't seeing things. She was wearing a petite emerald green satin nightie. It had very thin straps, and fell to just the tops of her thighs. Her hair was loose, and thrown over one shoulder, and her eyes were bright, and rather nervous-looking. Both her hands were fidgeting with the hem of her delicate-looking nightie, like she was trying to pull it down farther. "Wow," was all he could say. "Thanks," she muttered in response. She then took a hesitant step towards him. "I told you we had thought of a way to help you," she stammered nervously. "Uh-huh," Harry responded lamely, memorizing every curve of her body. She stepped forward and took his hand. "I've thought a lot about this, and I know that I love you with every fiber of my being. I'm not an idiot. I know there's the possibility that you'll walk into that thing tomorrow and not come out the other side. So, I want you to know exactly how much I truly love you, and how much you mean to me." At that, Daphne reached up and kissed him softly. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her closer. Daphne opened her mouth and deepened the kiss, pressing her body closer to his. Harry pulled back, breaking the kiss, and staring into her eyes. "I love you, too. But we don't have to do this. Not if you're not ready." Daphne smiled, remembering what Hermione said about Harry being noble. "What if this is the last night we have together, Harry? I told you I've thought about this a lot. I'm ready. I want to be with you, mind, body and soul. I know we haven't had the ceremony, or have rings, or anything like that, but for tonight, let's forget all that, and let's be husband and wife." Harry stared into her eyes, and found he had no more arguments for her, or himself. He loved her, pure and simple. He would have done anything she had asked, and he was prepared to die for her. If this was what she wanted, to be with him on this night, then he would. Because he loved her and he desired her just as much as she did him. He nodded, and she smiled softly, leading him to the bed. She turned and began kissing him again. Harry ran his hands across her bare shoulders, delighting in the feel of her smooth soft skin. Daphne shivered at his touch. The butterflies in her stomach began to dance as he began to kiss her neck, and rubbing her arms. She reached out and untucked his shirt, nearly tearing it off as her own excitement began to build. She let out soft moans as he devoured her flesh. She pulled his hair, and removed his mouth from her neck so she could kiss him again. Her own hands began exploring his chest, marveling at how solid his chest was built, yet how smooth his skin was. Harry began pushing Daphne back on the bed, and crawled on top of her. He bent low and began kissing her harder than he ever had before. He smiled to himself when he heard her whisper his name, and groan as he began moving his hands along the smooth fabric of her negligee. His hands found her breasts, and he couldn't help but notice the hard buds of her nipples. Daphne arched her back at his touch, and had to bite her lip to keep from screaming out. They had touched each other before many times, but this was different. This was passionate. This was something stronger. Harry had touched her chest a few times, but it had always been over her clothing. He'd never been so close to touching her supple flesh before, and now, it was all she wanted him to do. Daphne rolled him onto his back, and quickly grabbed the hem of the green satin nightie and pulled it over her head, exposing her naked torso to him. Harry gulped as he finally beheld Daphne in her nudity. Her breasts were more beautiful than he'd ever imagined them, and he gently cupped them both. He pulled himself up to her, and she wrapped her arms tightly around him as they kissed again, exploring each other's mouths with their tongues. It didn't take long before Harry began moving his lips down Daphne's body. Her breathing became more ragged as he nuzzled her. She thought she might have fainted dead away when his mouth closed around her nipple. The sensations were like electricity running up and down her spine. Daphne didn't hold back this time, and let loose a guttural moan of pleasure. Harry pulled back, thinking he'd hurt her, only to be ordered to not stop. With a small grin, Harry returned to his ministrations while Daphne writhed in pleasure. Harry had to arch his own back when Daphne ran her fingernails down his spine. He picked her up, and lay her back on the bed properly, before he quickly removed his pants and shoes. He climbed into the bed next to her, and Daphne pulled him towards her, reveling in the feel of his warm skin on hers. They explored each other more intently now, their fire building inside of them both. Harry ran his hands down to the warm spot between her legs, and began to rub gently. Daphne gasped in his ear as she felt her body respond to his touch. She was fearful of what was about to happen, but she couldn't understand why anymore. How could anything that felt this good be bad? Daphne let her own hand slide down his body until she felt his manhood. She had rubbed him a few times through his trousers, so she had an idea of its shape, but it didn't compare to being able to actually hold it in her hand. His breathing deepened as she glided her hand slowly along his length. "Harry," she whispered heavily. "I need you. I want you to take me, now." Harry kissed her gently as she guided him to her entrance. He could feel her heat as he began to enter her womanhood slowly. Her hands reached around him, grasping his rear, she began pushing him further inside of her. There was a moment where he felt something, and then Daphne gave a small cry of pain. He looked at her suddenly, and she just stared back, a small tear falling from her eye, yet she kept pushing him inside of her. They began slowly moving. She wrapped her legs around him, trying to keep him as close as possible to her, filling her. But slowly she began to move against him. With each roll of her hips, sensations of pleasure washed over her. He kissed her softly, moving his own hips with hers. Each thrust was met with equal passion. Their pleasure built with every stroke. Daphne began to moan and call out for him. Harry met her with his own groans of pleasure. Again and again he felt her fingernails slide down his spine, driving him further into her. Daphne began to feel something. It began in her stomach and began to grow with every thrust. Her skin began to tingle, and she was having difficulty catching her breath, but she wasn't frightened. She was losing herself to the sensations, and all at once, and without warning, her body exploded in bliss. Her toes curled, and every muscle seized up as the feeling shot up her spine. Daphne growled in ecstasy as her orgasm took her. Harry had deepened his strokes and quickened his pace. Hearing Daphne urging him on had made him want to pleasure her further. He began to feel himself grow closer to his own climax, just as Daphne's body seized up, and she held him in a death grip, panting and groaning. He kept up his rhythm for only a few moments longer when his own orgasm made him cry out. They lay together, sweaty, breathing hard, lightly kissing each other. She watched his face as he stared back at her. Slowly her sense returned to her, and she began to giggle. "What?" he asked, breathlessly. "We could have been doing that this whole time," she asked, still laughing. Harry grinned and kissed her deeply. Her laughter melted away as she gave herself to his kiss. She held him close to her as they broke their kiss. "I want you to remember this," she said softly. "I want you to know how deeply I love you, Harry Potter. You come back to me, or I'll come after you." Harry kissed Daphne's lips gently, then looked her deep in the eye. "I will not stop fighting until I'm back in your arms, my love." Lord Voldemort crumpled the letter in his skeletal hands and screamed with rage. He'd been deceived. He'd been lied to. He had a spy in his midst, and he was going to make that person pay. He was going to end this farce once and for all, tomorrow evening. He knew where Potter was going to be, and he knew when. He also knew that he had to destroy Potter himself, face to face, with no one helping him. It was how Potter had been able to escape so many times before. But not this time. He would go himself and bring Potter's body back himself. Then there would be no more questions. No more whispers. No more doubts. Tomorrow night, Lord Voldemort would go to the Ministry of Magic and he would kill Harry Potter once and for all, then he would deal with that treacherous snake, Severus Snape. Please like and subscribe.